Hello. So I know we've covered a lot of information for exam 2. So what I'd like to do is provide you with a walkthrough of the type of questions that you can expect on the exam. Just let me give you a quick window into my process. When I make up any exam, what I do is I look at the homeworks and the concept quiz questions and then generate exam questions from those. So what I'm going to do now is live with you on the screen. I'm going to scroll through the draft of exam 2 as I have it right now and tell you the types of problems that are on the exam. With that said, I need to stress that this is not a comprehensive look at all of the problems on the exam. I'm scrolling through a draft of the test to indicate at a high level most of the key topics that are covered. I may miss some topics. I may add or cut some questions from the final version of the exam. Okay, with that overview, let's get started. The first thing is definitely please read the important general instructions. They're right at the top of the exam. They're highlighted in the beginning in red. And then moving on to Chapter 8A. In Chapter 8A, you should definitely know the fundamental present value, future value formula for two cash flow problems and be able to solve that for present value, future value, interest rate, or discount rate. And probably not time because that requires logs. Also in 8A, we looked at cash flow diagrams, so you definitely have to know how to read cash flow diagrams and is a given diagram for a borrower or a lender. Then on to Chapter 8B. In Chapter 8B, you should definitely know how to solve perpetuity problems. And in Chapter 8B, we looked at the general case of multiple future cash flow problems. So you should be able to solve those types of problems. That's where we have on the left-hand side, PV tote is equal to, and well, that could be PV tote or CF0, right, on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we have all the future cash flows, each one of them individually discounted back to t equals 0, and then added up. So we covered that in 8B. You should definitely know how to work with those. Also, I think it was in 8B we looked at annuity dues, and you should be able to work with annuity dues. You can tell an annuity due right away immediately because the payments, the future payments happen at the beginning of the period instead of the end of the period. And we also looked at in 8B, we spent a lot of time with constant cash flow projects, sometimes called annuities, but we looked at those for all sorts of different stuff, like little mortgages and things like that. And then in 8C, we looked at how to handle corporate bonds at issuance and then after issuance. And we looked at how much money you're going to have at some future time. If you make a deposit now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, it's all growing at 6%. How much will you have 3.75 years from now? That type of thing. We also, of course, spent a lot of time in 8C on the APR and the EAIR. So you need to know how to work with those. And I do have a video for you in the exam 2 study guide and review materials on how to keep track of all of the Chapter 8 formulas, including the constant uniform cash flow problems, uniform cash flows with annuities due, all that stuff. So I would take a look at that video. That, again, is in the exam 2 study and review guide page. So what else do we have going here? In 8D, that was pretty much focused on amortization of loans, and we only did that for uniform cash flow loans, things like mortgages. So you should definitely know how to do that type of stuff in 8D, the amortization amount of a uniform loan payment, the interest amount, stuff like that. And Let me see what else we have here. That's pretty much the highlights for all of Chapter 8. And in Chapter 9, we looked at real rates versus nominal rates a little bit. And we looked at the risks in Chapter 9 of Treasury securities, right? We call them riskless securities, but of course they do have some risk. And we talked about some examples illustrating those risks. And in Chapter 10, when we got into risk more generally for individual projects, one thing we thought about was what's the best opportunity cost investment for someone who has a certain mission in the investing world. So if you're given an investment mission by someone, you should be able to pick out what is their best opportunity cost investment when using the opportunity investment model. And let's see, we talked a bit about some aspects of project-specific risk for things like fixed income investments where a promised cash flow was 100 and there was some probability that you weren't going to get that because that has no risk. So maybe there's a 10% probability that the company is going to flame out due to stupid management and you get a lower cash flow. So you want to be able to work from that stuff to a weighted average cash flow for those types of problems. On to Chapter 11. In Chapter 11 is a chapter that, as I said in the normal videos, I really love because that really gets to the heart of everything we do in finance. Essentially, everything we do in finance is shown in Chapter 11, and everything following that is just some kind of special case. So specifically, we looked at the NPV, the IRR, and the BCR methods, and you should definitely know how to compute the NPV of a project and know what it means. Let's see, you definitely want to know how to compute the IRR of a project. I definitely would not give you an IRR problem where you need Excel, but I might give you a multiple choice with several answers, and you have to pick the answer that has the correct IRR, something like that. Let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, you need to know when the NPV rule says a project is good to go, same with BCR, same with the IRR rules. And we also looked at the end of Chapter 11 and Chapter 11B, I believe, although I'm not sure, we looked at the payback method. So you need to know what the payback method is and how it differs from the NPV, IRR, and BCR methods. What it is, how it's different, and also when you might want to use it. And let's see, we also looked at in 11B mutually exclusive equal length projects. So you need to know how to choose. If you have two mutually exclusive equal length projects, you need to know which one to choose, and just hint on that. NPV is always the way to go unless you have some unusual startup type situation where you may want to look at the payback method. Then on to Chapter 12 was just a review of statistics and probability. Heads up in the practice problems for Chapter 12. There are some really good problems in there that will help you a lot with Chapter 13, so you might want to look at those. And then on to Chapter 13, we looked at normally distributed stock returns, things like that, where we look at historical returns, get an expected value standard deviation, and then just model, say that going forward, we expect that the future will look like the past, and those returns can be modeled with the normal distribution with the same expected value and standard deviation. And so like there was in the Chapter 13A, I believe, homework with a normal distribution graph and some historical data asking you to answer some questions about that, you should expect to see something like that. And then in 13B was about correlations, correlation coefficient, beta, alpha, that type of stuff. So you should definitely know how to put together what's going to be the expected value of a portfolio of 1, 2, 3 stocks. If for each stock you know its expected value and standard deviation, and you should definitely know how to compute the standard deviation of a portfolio of 2 stocks if you know their standard deviations and the correlation coefficient between them. And let's see, what else do we have here? You definitely should know the difference between beta and the correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient doesn't measure relative amplitudes, and beta does. And you should know who's an alpha-focused investor and who's a beta-focused investor, and the types of things that beta is often used for, like comparing a single company's stock returns to an overall market's returns and stuff like that. So that goes through all the questions that I have for exam 2 as of right now. So I hope this is helpful, and I wish you really all the best on exam 2. Thanks for watching.